Well, Joseph Kotrie-Monson joins me, criminal defence solicitor, director of Monson Solicitors on Fleet Street, and we'll hear in a moment, hopefully anyway, from Reuben Diamond, former gang member, who knows people involved in gangs from the age of 7 and now works to try and change the lives of those young people. Hopefully we'll be able to contact Reuben. But Joseph Kotrie-Monson, first of all, have you seen a sentence along these lines before? Does this seem like a risk or a decent chance for this young man?
Well, good afternoon, Sheila. I think this is a very difficult story to comment on from a distance. Bear in mind, of course, that this was a man who the judge got to see face to face throughout a trial of several days and would have been balancing a number of factors, not just the rehabilitation. Bear in mind this boy was a child at the time of the offending, and of course punishment and deterrence. Now, you're right. The offence is clearly about as shocking and worrying for the public safety as one might imagine, as that very graphic video shows. But of major concern when sentencing somebody for offences committed as a youth will be for the judge rehabilitation rather than punishment. And that's the way our youth justice system works. The youth system's stated aims are not to punish children, but to try to fix them. Of course, this is knife crime, and a crime with a vicious-looking weapon, which must have been terrifying for anybody seeing it. And the word deterrent is seldom far from a judge's lips where knife crime is concerned. So I suppose to analyse or to consider what led to the judge proposing an unusual approach, this was a boy, as has been reported in some quarters and not others. And I have to say, I think the interference at a political level with the judicial arm of our government by Sadiq Khan, who wasn't in court, is inappropriate and unhelpful in these circumstances. This was an unenviable task for a judge. This was a boy with experience of major trauma throughout his teens. Highlights of that include at 13 years old discovering his brother's body dead after a seizure. He had been recently imprisoned by drug dealers for 10 days and in a house and forced to sell drugs in that house. The judge not only had the benefit of that information, Sheila, but from his barrister, but also the probation service, an independent source, but also crucially got to evaluate this boy personally during the trial, something that despite what we've seen, we have not been able to do. Certainly Sadiq Khan hasn't been able to do. Of course, truly awful nature of this attack, but the judge has taken the view, and the judges are not they are not chosen on the basis that they are light touches. Judges come from the prosecutorial ranks, not defence lawyers like me typically, but the judge has taken the view, having seen much more of this person and seen much more of all the circumstances about the trauma, that there is actually an opportunity to save him. If he's simply imprisoned, Sheila, we must consider, must we not, if he's simply imprisoned and these things aren't properly addressed, what kind of problem with a child as damaged as this might we be creating?
It's funny you keep calling him a child. And I'm the queen of calling children until they're adults, so I get what you're doing. But it's hard to see him as a child. This incredibly physically strong, agile, fit young man brandishing such a terrible weapon of... Well, I mean, it's a weapon of death, basically. Had he got into that car, there is no doubt in my mind that the passenger would be dead.
Well, in fact, he did get into the car. The passenger did die, but of course... Only when the passenger ran. Yeah, well...
had he got into the car and got his hands on that man, there's no doubt in my mind that he would be dead.
Okay, well, he wasn't charged with attempted
I know
murder,
he wasn't, but that's the point I'm making, that on that whisker of fate, he gets to go home to his mum.
Well, actually, I think it's probably more complicated than just his status as a youth at the time. He was sentenced, nevertheless, as an adult. But you're right. This was not an easy decision to make. These decisions are so finely balanced, Sheila. It's so easy for us to criticise, having seen the worst part of the situation. A judge who has seen everything in the round, who knows that she is risking criticism by making. She's
making a fine judgment. I see that. She's making a judgment that is in the hope, and it's not an unrealistic hope, in the hope that external interventions plus the influence of a mother who's prepared to take responsibility between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., that there is some creative possibility here for this young man. I get that. I get that.
And Sheila, do you know what is infinitely more certain than the hope of rehabilitation? It's the overwhelming likelihood that a prison sentence for somebody who can be as an alternative, sentenced creatively in a way that they know they're on a suspended sentence, they breach any of those meetings, and it's not just probation involvement, but also that those allocated days of training. But that if they breach any of that, they'll be straight into prison. And the certainty, if they are just sent off to prison rather than just the hope of rehabilitation,
of just embedding those problems.
Absolutely. Imagine what such a character would be like coming out 3-4 years' time in a prison system where they'll be neglected, exposed to drugs, and locked up 23.5 hours a day.
OK, great to talk to you as ever. Joseph Kotrie-Monson, Criminal Defence Solicitor, Director of Mary Monson Solicitors on Fleet Street.